The Community Strategic Plan is the community's vision for the Central Coast for the next 10 years. It's called One Central Coast because this is the first plan for the whole of the Central Coast. We are one region, one council and one community. We live in a special place here on the coast, one in which we want all members of our community to feel valued and have access to a range of opportunities to participate in the richness of community life. And every one of us can play a part in bringing this community vision to life.
If people feel part of a community in some way, they'll give without probably even knowing they're doing it.
I wanted to restore this building and get it back to what it was. It was the jewel of the crown, and I wanted to get it back to that. Making a difference. I guess that's what we're really here for.
The smile on the faces when they see these engines and that bus coming around, they just love it.
If you're following what makes you happy and excited and interested, then you're definitely going to live a life that you will be thankful to have lived.
At the end of the day, we just had a good idea. We needed the support of many people to turn that great idea into a sustainable venture. My name's Tim Silverwood. I grew up on the Central Coast. It wasn't until I got a bit older and started travelling around the world I realised that what we had was so special because people don't always treat the environment as well as we do here on the Central Coast. Our programs have focused on going into schools and running events in communities. We also have a huge global online audience. One man cannot solve these big global problems. It's going to take a tribe of people coming together to solve them. It's a really amazing and rewarding journey in spreading this message around the world.
I've always been on the coast and I've loved the coast. About 6 years ago I bought the Chapman building. I got the opportunity, I saw that it was for sale and I stood back on the car park up there and a Village Central and I looked down and I could just feel this was the place to be. I could just see what the town was. There's always these little niches that are going back and forth and I guess it's an obsession for all of us because we saw what Wyong was like and it's getting it to a place where we're proud to say we're from Wyong. Like it's become a real proud place to be.
My name's Chris Wallace. Myself and my wife, we own Community Fire Education and the Fun Engine. We educate the community in a different way. We teach people what to do in case of fire. One of the biggest things is our education bus. What we do, we go out to different fates, festivals, wherever we can go. When we do the bus sometimes, we get 2,000 through that bus. I just enjoy communicating and getting out there and just educating in a different way.
I'm Meredith Gilmore. I've lived on the coast since 2000, originally from Sydney. Chose the coast because it's close to Sydney, but it's got that more laid back kind of thing that I like. I like living in regional areas. I started visual art in my 40s. It's just so different from what I ever thought that I'd ever do, and it is what led me into thinking it would be great to talk to people in the arts on the radio. So I started doing some shows, particularly a program called Coast Arts, which was a new show, and I reached out into the community because I'm an artist as well. And I just felt like there was a lot of scope on the radio to do interviews with artists and poets and writers, and that's been going now for over 7 years.
My name is Shauna O'Brien. I am from the Central Coast of New South Wales on Dark and Young land, and I'm a dancer. As an Indigenous dancer, we're very inspired by the environment and where we come from, all of the trees, the way that they curve around all of the rocks and the sea faces, the beautiful water, the fresh air, and that plays a huge part in the creative process. I was lucky enough to study at NASA Dance College, which was a super incredible experience, and the facilities, the studios are really beautiful, the staff are incredible, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. Through volunteering, I was able to meet a bunch of really great other young people in the community that are really passionate about helping other people, and that's a way of taking something that I'm very passionate about and sharing that with other people. No matter where I go to work or if I have to spend a lot of time in Sydney, I always come back to the Central Coast because it feels like home and it helps rejuvenate me.
One of the things about the Central Coast I've noticed as well, which is people are so helpful to each other. They collaborate, they are interested in going to each other's exhibitions, not just to see what people are doing, but so that there are people there. And you've got to be competitive, but you don't have to always be competitive with each other.
If you're in a position to make a difference, I guess you're obliged to make that difference, really. Just happy to, give it all I could, and it became, a local icon and a bustling place to be.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. Welcome to the 28th of June 2022 Central Coast Council Ordinary Meeting. I now declare that meeting open. Just to remind you that the meeting is being webcast, and so anyone who is participating, remember what you say is recorded, and you therefore should make sure you're not making any comments that are defamatory or anything like that. I note that we don't have a public forum this evening, despite the fact that we published that on the website and we asked people to contribute. Unfortunately, we didn't get anybody this time round. But nonetheless, we will continue now with the ordinary meeting of council, and I just would ask you to respect the COVID rules, and as I can see up there, you've all very nicely separated yourself, which is great. So we don't want to, and particularly myself, I do not want to catch anything tonight. What I normally do is I just give a little bit of a summary of what's been going on over the last month. So I will do that now. The first thing is that I welcome the Minister for Local Government, the Honourable Wendy Tuckerman's announcements of Central Coast's local government election to be held on the 14th of September 2024. I did suggest to the government it could be held earlier, but they've made their determination based on the reasons that was outlined by the Minister. That proclamation also outlines the continuation of my term of appointment as Council's Administrator up until the election date set. At this stage, I do plan to continue as Central Coast Administrator and look forward to continuing to work with the Central Coast community to deliver the best outcomes for the region. Looking at some of the nice positive stuff that's been happening after, I guess, a number of months of when things weren't quite so good, we are pleased to announce the Central Coast has officially achieved Eco Destination Certification with Ecotourism Australia. Achieving this certification recognises the Central Coast as a world-class location for sustainable and nature-based tourism, which will provide a substantial ongoing boost to the local economy. We're pretty excited, I've got to say here, at the prospective boost in ecotourism that being an ecotourism destination will bring, and it will help bring sustainable local employment and training opportunities to the Central Coast community. It was a priority action in our destination management plan, and it will now encourage further growth in the tourism sector. Tourism is, I will remind everybody, a very important pillar of the Central Coast economy, and ecotourism will play an integral role in ensuring our region is front of mind for responsible and conscious visitors based on globally recognised sustainability principles. We now have here on the coast 6 eco-certified operators and 9 eco-certification applicants, the largest regional cohort on the Eco Destination Certification Program. So if you want to find out a little bit more about East Coast eco-operators, visit the website or the dedicated destination website lovecentralcoast.com. While I've always been sort of in favour of democracy, I am very strongly of the view that SAC council should not be allowed to run for council in a subsequent election. And I will continue to make representation to the New South Wales Government on this issue, and also to strengthen sanctions under the Code of Conduct for the misbehaviour of councils. When you look around at the current time at those councils that are suffering issues such as that, it's quite clear that the lack of sanctions, meaningful sanctions, does, I think in my view, not help councils perform to their optimum. The experience has shown from talking to the other administrators that when previous councils return from a period of administration, the risk of deterioration increases dramatically. So holding local government elections in 2024, I can only hope will attract new councillors to the councillor role. But the announcement by that Minister does provide council with a date to work towards and time to implement the Public Inquiry Commissioner's recommendations, and it does allow the CEO, Mr David Farmer, and the executive team to actually embed a number of the improvement processes that have already commenced inside the organisation, and that will and should mean a very solid foundation for a newly elected body. Some other really good news we've got is that the New South Wales Local Government Excellence Award, late last month, Central Coast Council was named a winner in one category and highly commended in another at the New South Wales Local Government Excellence Awards. So whilst one swallow doesn't make a summer, it is great to see that our plant and fleet team were the category winner for its Fleet and Driver Management Transformation Project in the Innovative Leadership category. And the company that was responsible for that did have a stand down at the National Assembly in Canberra, which I attended last week, and they went on to say that they'd had other councils going to them very keen on looking at the program that we had introduced here and has provided quite large savings for us. So that company has been very grateful to us because we in fact have led the way for them, and they have now got other councils looking to pick up the same management tool. Further, our marketing and tourism was highly commended for its Love Central Coast project in the Special Project Initiative category. And these Local Government Excellence Awards do celebrate outstanding achievements across local government, and because they promote innovation and improvement within the community. I'm very proud, I've got to say, after all the trials and tribulations this entity's gone through, that the staff have been able to still keep innovating, still keep doing the job, and been able to be recognised amongst their peers as a council that is leading in innovation and business improvements. So I have to say it's a big shout out to the council staff for doing what they've done. It's also a big testament to the resilience, skills and the commitment to the community from this group of people that make up this council. And I'm sure that we will continue to innovate in a financially responsible, sustainable and strategic manner. Now, last week I did attend the 2022 National General Assembly in Canberra, which is a meeting of councils from all across Australia. There was close to 1,000 people attending it. It was, they said, the largest assembly that has ever been there. So that was good, and perhaps coincidental that there's been a change at the federal government level. Now, the Minister for Regional Development and Local Government and Territories, the Honourable Christy McBain, MP, spoke, and it's great to see that she was announcing that the new federal government has reinstated local government representation to National Cabinet. Now, that was removed some years ago, and it does mean now that we have a local government minister who does represent the local government sector sitting on the National Cabinet. And this should hopefully benefit local government at all levels. The Minister also announced there would be a top-up to the $500 million roading plan with a further $250 million, making a total of $750 million. She also announced that there will be a further $200 million allocated a year for a disaster mitigation program for councils. And that should be a good tool to enable to try and protect our communities for future fires and floods. We also had the Minister for Emergency Management, the Honourable Murray Watt, and the Leader of the National Party, David Littleproud, speaking. And I have to say, it was a change. I've been going to these conferences for a number of years now, and generally speaking, it's a left slinging off at the right, whichever way round it is, about who's not doing this and who's doing that, and so on. I have to say, the maturity with both sides of politics, I'm talking about National and Labor, actually talked extremely well. They talked about working together to improve local government for the benefit of the communities. And I thought that was a great step forward. Now, it may well not last, but at least they've started off with the right intentions. The strong themes of the conference was the importance, particularly of the financial assistance grants. And it's for people that aren't aware, some time ago, the federal government provided untied grants, called the financial assistance grants, or FAGs for short, to local government. And they were set at 1% of the national taxation base that is collected by the federal government. Over time, that has been reduced. And right as we speak today, we get about half that, 0.53% to be exact. Now, it was pointed out during some of the sessions that local government actually only collects about 3.5% of all taxation that is collected across Australia. And it's because of that small percentage that we do rely heavily on grants from both state and Commonwealth to support our communities. There are in fact over 100 motions submitted by councils for debate, but unfortunately time ran out and they only covered a bit over half of those which were formally debated. The other half will in fact be addressed by the executive of Local Government Australia. The main themes were the traditional themes that come out of these pretty much every time, of provision of more affordable housing, constitutional recognition, more funding as per the grants, the FAGS grants, climate change and renewable energy. Surprisingly, there were some obvious changes to previous local government thinking. And a couple of examples where regional councils have started to push back strongly about the need to accommodate solar and wind farms in their backyards at the expense of the eastern seaboard. And there was a very close call on a resolution to overturn the ban on investigating nuclear energy as a source of energy for Australia. And that is certainly a substantial change as per the voting blocks that's been around previously. So with that, it was very cold in Canberra, as is usual, but it was interesting to see the large number of people there, and actually for me to be able to share some of the stories that we've had, and also to learn a little bit more about some of the other organisations. And I have to say, funding is very definitely a major problem for councils, and it occupies probably their number one concern moving forward. And I'll have something more about that to say a little bit later on. So that concludes those comments from myself, and we'll now move back to the agenda. Item 1.1, disclosures of interest. I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose. I don't believe any of the staff have. Nope. So I will now move to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 1.2, the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. I can confirm that I've looked at the minutes, that they are, in my view, a full and accurate record, and I would now like to resolve the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 1.3, notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. We are not going to deal with any matters in closed session tonight, so I will therefore resolve to adopt the resolution to that effect that is shown on the screen. Now we move into the substantive agenda, and the first item is the traditional first one that we are used to now, and hopefully most of you do have a chance to have a look at it, and that is the monthly finance report for May. So that's for 11 months trading, and I will now ask the CEO, who's unfortunately stuck down with COVID, which is why he's not here in person, so I'm sure his voice hopefully will carry us through, but yes, I've noticed he's got dressed for the occasion, at least he's not that ill. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Administrator. The monthly financials show a negative result of $3.5 million for the month. However, in this month, we've recognised a number of one-off items which have adjusted the outcome to give a better idea of where we're going to land at the end of the year. In particular, we've recognised significant loss and disposal of fixed assets from adjustments in our stock of fixed assets. Sometimes, essentially, some of these were valueless assets that we brought to account and therefore had to write them down, and we're recognising them now as they would be recognised at the end of the year in the statements. We've also adjusted the market value of our investments as interest rates move. This negative movement is book entry only as we anticipate holding those investments to maturity. So as it stands, we're currently running a $68 million surplus for the 11 months to date. We anticipate that this position will deteriorate a little between now and the end of June, which is only a week away or so. And our current estimate is for a $40 million surplus. I have some confidence we'll perform a little bit better than that. Importantly, at the same time last year, we were in deficit of $38 million, and now we're in surplus of $68 million, which means our operational performance has turned around by more than $100 million year on year. Weather and supply chain issues have combined to constrain our capital works delivery, which has in turn impacted on Council's cash position, which we'll discuss the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. I have to again congratulate the organisation for the discipline and financial understandings that they're now bringing to the organisation. It is a great result, and I do look forward to, and I certainly hope, Mr. Farmer, you're correct, that we will do a little bit better than the 40 million, and then I imagine we may be able to spend some of that a little bit later on. So I won't spend any more time on that because it's not necessary. The only thing I would like to say is that in discussions with the state government about what might improve councillor behaviour and understanding I'm actually putting forward the suggestion strongly that all councils should produce a monthly report similar to what we do, and the cash position, as you will see in the next report that Mr Farmer will speak to. I think it's pretty important that that's done so we get a consistency across all councils. Now, one of the things that you may not appreciate is that the actual requirements under the Local Government Act is we report quarterly. And when we report quarterly, the accounting practice for local government says you bring all your revenue to account at the beginning. So all the money that we're proposing to collect for rates comes in right at the front. And thereafter, basically you're just debiting costs against that. You're not running, if you like, a service or a business understanding the flows of income and the outflows of expenditure. So what the monthly report does, and it says it in it, we actually say we depart from that and we actually apportion the revenue from rates and so on a 1/12 basis, so that every month the organisation's reporting the amount of money that's come in for that month and the expenditure for that month, and we flow through to the year end doing that. So my suggestion to the government is that's standardised and moved away from this reporting which only exists in local government. It doesn't exist anywhere else, where you get all the money up front before you've actually received it, because as you know, it comes in 4 instalments during the year. So just as an aside, we are utilising the way we are reporting to try and influence the way that local government may operate into the future. With that, I'm going to agree to those recommendations that are shown on the screen and move those as a decision of council. Now, item 2.2 is the investment report for May. Mr Farmer, again, your bailiwick.
The council reports $669 million of cash in hand. This includes restricted funds of $447 million. I've seen some public discussion on various forums about council proposing to use restricted funds in its budget next year. And I think I need to clarify the concept of the use of restricted funds. Restricted funds are meant to be spent. They're collected for a specific purpose, or received and held for a specific purpose, and they are expected to be spent, but they should only be spent on the purpose for which they're collected. A perfect example is funds that are collected for sewer purposes can only be spent on providing sewer services. Grant funds that are received for a specific purpose can only be spent on specific purposes. And additionally, developer contributions can only be spent for the reasons that they're collected. So suggestion that council spending restricted funds as being improper or wrong couldn't be further from the truth. Council just needs to spend its restricted funds for the purposes for which they are restricted, and not on other expenses, which happened reasonably recently in this organisation's history. At the moment, council still has negative restricted funds in both water fund and drainage fund, but these funds are currently able to be offset by working funds from general fund. The current upcoming pricing structure in water should see positive funds restored during the 4-year price determination. However, drainage fund is likely to be in the negative, and we'll discuss that in the years going forward. So, as I said, $669 million, that's bolstered higher than we anticipated because our capital program is not being able to be spent as effectively as it should because of both weather and supply chain issues. So I would anticipate, as we adopt the budget that we're moving to reasonably soon, that we'll see some of those funds being spent in the upcoming financial year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Farmer. I have to say it's a very timely reminder again to the community that restricted funds are meant to be spent, but I'll add the words appropriately, and that's what wasn't the case previously. So it's also very good to see that our current cash position, which is on one hand, you know, would have been nice to be able to spend some of it, but the fact we have accumulated quite a large amount of cash does give us right at the moment a pretty strong buffer against any adverse issues that might occur at this point in time. I think when we come to talk about the actual delivery program for the next financial year, you will see that we are looking to actually expense some of the cash reserves that we have built up. This is unrestricted cash, not necessarily restricted, that we haven't built up that, as Mr Farmer pointed out, in the Drainage Fund and Water Fund. They are still negative, but again, as pointed out, hopefully that will turn as the revenue from IPART for water, sewer and drainage comes to play. So with that, again, I will support the recommendations that are shown on the screen and pass those as a decision of Council. And now we move to the resourcing strategy. And this is a big topic, and I can actually hold it up. That's what it is. It wouldn't fit into the other folder by itself. It is a massive piece of work, and to try and make some sense of it, I'm going to ask Dr. Howe to talk about it.
Thank you, Administrator. The report identifies how community submissions and other new information has been considered in development of a final suite of integrated planning and reporting documents, and seeks a resolution of Council to adopt those documents ahead of the 2023 financial year. The draft Community Strategic Plan, Delivery Program, Operational Plan, Resourcing Strategy and Fees and Charges, which is that tome that you held up earlier, were exhibited for 28 days. We received 37 submissions, the majority of which related to the Delivery Program and the Operational Plan. A summary of the submissions and our response to them is provided in attachment 6 of the report. And some of the key matters that were raised were suggestions for further refinement of the structure and focus of the strategic plan, concerns regarding the increase in rates, fees and charges, queries, comments and suggestions on the details in the delivery program and operational plan, requests to vary the timeframe and scope of delivery, and some general queries and comments about Council. Amendments have been made to the final documents in response to those submissions, and also as a result of finalisation of the IPART's determination on water, sewer and drainage fees, which those who are following closely would note were released on the day of the last council meeting. The Minister for Local Government's recent announcement of the date of the next local government election, which has meant we've deferred some of that expenditure from next year to the following year. Our internal review and some new information that's been released in relation to New South Wales Government statutory fees for next year, and some better clarity around Council's end-of-year financial position, as Mr Farmer has identified. So some of the key activities that are proposed to be undertaken next year include further work to implement Council's Disability Inclusion Action Plan, commencement of place plans for Wyong and the Peninsula, investigation of food organics and garden organics processing solution for the LGA, as well as a comprehensive review of the next Community Strategic Plan. And you might recall that there were some comments in the submissions that related to that matter, and completion of the Central Coast Housing Strategy. Some of the capital works that are proposed in next year's budget include works at Tukley, Copacabana, East Gosford and Halakalani to protect lake water quality through the construction of gross pollutant traps, upgrades to roads at Woy Woy, Lisarow, Budgie and Shelley Beach, continuation of pathway construction at Magenta and Tuggerawong, a range of play space upgrades across the LGA, and commencement of construction of our very significant regional library in Gosford. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
And I might just come in and talk a little bit about the budget, and I think there's a couple of slides there. In terms of the capital works, $176 million is planned for the upcoming financial year, $176.5 million. Roughly half of that will be renewals, a smaller proportion being new and strategic in line with growth and unmet community needs, and about $70 million worth of upgrades. As we can see, going forward into future years, there's a larger expenditure in 2023-24, driven by a couple of major projects, including Marty sewer treatment, Marty water treatment plant. So that's that. If we go to the final budget numbers, you can see that operating income is $576 million, and the budget has gone down a little in terms of its surplus. That's been driven by a number of changes in the external environment. Important changes that we've submitted in the budget are that we've identified that the electricity market currently is extremely volatile and providers are extremely challenged. So to be cautious, we've adjusted our budget upwards significantly in the electricity market to reflect a really volatile market, and we're a very heavy user of electricity, particularly in the water and sewer business, and having to pump large amounts of water and wastewater around the local government area. And we've also specifically been able to allocate, due to our better than anticipated financial performance in the current year, additional resourcing in a number of areas to supplement identified areas of community need. They will include additional resourcing for development assessment to improve assessment times, additional funding for road maintenance works as a result of issues we've identified during recent weather events, additional funding for open space to improve vegetation management, that's both trees and vegetation as well as parklands, and we're also identifying additional funding to finalise the development of plans of management for council reserves so we can issue licences, etc. on Crown lands. It also has, as identified, the final determinations for water, sewer, wastewater and drainage prices, as identified by IPART on the day that this budget was put out for determination, or the financial parts that were put out for exhibition. We're identifying proposed borrowings to fund the Marty water treatment plant upgrade in 23, 24 and 24, 25. That was now possible to be funded, and that should see significant improvements in some water quality in certain areas and reliability of supply. And the election, of course, has been deferred, so those funds are out. What should be noticed, while our water and sewer prices will be increasing in this year's budget, IPART noted that our pricing will still make us the third lowest water and sewer provider amongst all the large providers Australia-wide. The other two significant components of Council's annual rate bills are general rates, which have a 1% increase this year, and the domestic waste charge, which has a 0 increase this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. I think it's a pretty exciting document when in the year following some financial disharmony, we're able to increase funding into specific areas that the community wants us to. And Mr. Farmer outlined those, which is in planning staff, roading, vegetation improvement, and plans of management for Crown land. Those are key things which we need to get onto. So the ability to do this comes about, as Mr. Farmer said, because the budgeted amount for next year in the long-term financial plan was approximately $28 million surplus. The numbers that Mr. Farmer showed is $9 million, so it's considerably less, in the order of $20 million. But as Mr. Farmer also pointed out in the financial results, we're hoping for a result higher than the $40 million that is currently forecasted for the end of year. And now that compares against a $7 million original budget. So you can see over the 2-year period, what we're doing is reallocating the extra money that we didn't spend and saved during the current financial year we're in, and we're allocating that out to improve services next year, which will make the bottom line look not quite as good. But remember, we've got that money coming from this year, and some of that will go to repay long-term debt. The other goes to fund up the difference between the 9 and the 28. So hopefully that's clear to people. as to how we're managing that. The rest of the long-term financial plan is intact, and that shows us quite comfortably being able to meet the requirements of the bank to repay the $150 million of emergency loans. So when all that's taken into consideration, and the fact that we're able to hold the waste charge at where it currently is, that it's not increasing, I think it's a pretty good effort by the staff to work that through. There's some minor changes, as David pointed out, in the capital program, and again we're looking to have a little bit of an upsurge in some of the capital works we're able to do, and hopefully we will still continue to be able to receive renewal monies from state and Commonwealth grants, which again will help us with the bottom line down the track. So with that, there's a number of pages of resolutions, which fortunately we're not going to read them all out, otherwise it'll be here to Christmas, I think. But we will show them on the screen. Of course, they're available on the internet or in terms of the papers and so on. But we will just show there is a large number of things that have to be approved. And just a reminder that unless these were approved, we could not actually pay anybody come the 1st of July. It is that important that they are nailed tonight. So I will leave the screen to go through those, but I will make those as a decision of council. Whilst you're looking at that, I have also asked the CEO, and he has agreed, to see if we can't, and I have to say this is a recommendation that came from the Strategic Reference Group that was put together, and I have to thank them because they put a lot of input into the operational plan and the CSP, but I want to create a simpler document to that, because when I ask around us, not one of us has read every single page of that, and I've been around for a wee while and I've never read every single page of one of those documents. It's mind-blowingly difficult, and as the people on the reference group to CSP said after page 48, quote, I gave up. So what I want is to create a simpler document which encompasses the main points, a little along the lines that have been espoused in the words from Dr. Howe and from Mr. Farmer, so that we explain a little bit more in broad terms what is happening in the year, how it fits in the context of a long-term financial plan, and what are some of the key projects we're going to do. So it's not a CSP, it's not a delivery program, it's not a staff resourcing program. It is just a simple document that tells the community roughly what we're doing for the next 12 months and how it fits into the long-term financial plan. So Mr. Farmer has agreed that they can have a crack at trying to produce something, and hopefully that'll be a little bit more useful to the community than what we are required to do by the Local Government Act. So with that, we're still going through this, are we? So we'll move to item 2.4, which again, Mr. Farmer, I think you're just going to make some brief comments before we go through another long list of recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This is the making of the rates and charges, predominantly the land-based property rates, as well as special rates that are levied in certain areas for particular services, such as town centre levies, and also the domestic waste management charge. Importantly, as I mentioned before, and there seems to again have been some confusion about the special rate variation proposal, which was essentially to maintain the current levels of rates. The rates this year, the rate increase this year is 1% on the general rate component and on the special rates. And the domestic waste management charge, that is, depending on the value of your property, is still a substantial portion of your annual rate bill. That increases by zero. That is, the domestic waste management fee remains the same as last year. So rates and charges up by 1%, and rates up by 1%, and the domestic waste management charge fixed 0% increase for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. And just to remind the community, as Mr. Farmer pointed out, the rates are only going up by 1%. And when you take the standard household, which there probably isn't an exact standard average household, but if we take that, which uses 150 kilolitres of water per annum, then just to remind you that the total combined rates for your general rate, your drainage rate, your sewerage and water fees and charges are 10% below those of Newcastle and Lake Macquarie. And again, when people say that these are over the top, I just have to remind people that we are 10% lower than our neighbours in that regard. That is no intention to actually say that there aren't people who struggle. Of course there's people who are struggling with that, but that applies right across the state. When you look at our overall costs, as Mr Palmer pointed out, the water and sewer, we are the third lowest in the state. And as I said, when you combine it all together, we're 10% lower than our neighbours. And they have the, perhaps the benefit maybe, of having Sydney and Hunter Water in those two cases are providing their water and sewer services. So with that, I will move the large number of resolutions which are necessary to put those fees and charges in place. So we'll now move to item 2.5, which is a review of the policy for investment management, which I think Mr Farmer you want to make a comment on.
Yes, Mr Administrator, this is essentially a review of our investment policy. It's been updated to take advantage, take into account significant changes in the global and domestic investment environment. We've seen significant volatility, and we've also seen significant increases in interest rates and inflation worldwide. And it also recognises the presence and the importance of the mid-tier banks at the moment. So they are, not the big four, but they're Australian banks, and we've currently got a significant portion of our funding involved in investment with those Australian mid-tier banks. So we're recognising our use of those in that change policy. Apart from that, is essentially the same as what we've used for some time.
Yeah, I think it's a very sensible move to actually, by going to second tier, we can actually get slightly better interest rates. And of course, most of those organisations are fairly financially robust. So with that, I will move to adopt that review of policy for investment management for June 22. Item 2.6, which is the Administrator Expenses and Facilities Report. This report dates back to a requirement from the previous council that detailed reports on the provision of expenses and facilities to councillors will be publicly tabled at a council meeting every 6 months and published in full on council's websites. These reports will include expenditure summarised by individual council and as a total for all councillors. So with that, this paper just tables my expenses for the period from 1 November 2021 to 30th of April 2022. So with that, the numbers are in the report. So with that, I will move the recommendation that is shown on the screen. It is a noting paper. Item 2.7, which is our standard regular Governance Lighthouse report. This report goes to the ARIC, and this is a particular interest to the Audit and Risk Committee, because they are particularly keen to see how we're travelling against some of these areas. At the moment, the report's pretty benign, and we're travelling okay. So with that, I shall just move the resolution that is shown on the screen. Moving to item 2.8. Now, the next three items do involve the council giving a little bit of rent relief and help to businesses that are leasing premises off the council. And they all have slightly different reasons, but the first one is a rental concession that I'm being asked to agree to for Top Point Cafe restaurant. Now, this comes about because that facility operates out of the gallery in Gosford, and of course the gallery was closed for COVID, and of course trading out of there became virtually non-existent. Now, we did earlier in November last year actually approve some changes under the policies that we were asked to abide by the federal government and state governments in terms of providing rental relief to tenants. They weren't included at that time because they didn't bring the data together. They have now brought that data to us, so I have no difficulty in agreeing that whilst it's perhaps late, I think they are entitled to the rent relief. Because bear in mind, it's not council staff that operate it, these are private operators who put their money and life and soul into things, and it's no fault of theirs that COVID came along and the trading basically stopped. So we are now, this paper does argue that they should receive rent relief, and I'm happy to grant that, and with that I'm going to agree to the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 2.9 is a similar issue which applies to the Metro Cinemas at Lakehaven. And cinemas have had a particularly difficult time of it. And we did have in place some arrangements there, but frankly, it's not enough. It's a building, of course, which is fitted out and set up for a movie theatre and really doesn't have a lot of other uses. So again, I'm comfortable that we work with this organisation to help them out. You'll note that the resolutions do suggest that they do return to a full rent as per the lease agreement from February 2023. Now, the process for this rental is a different way. It is a percentage of their turnover. So if they happen to do better earlier on, our rental stream goes up. But it does give them certainty about what their costs will be should their revenues not change. And there's a number of reasons behind why this is not happening. During this period, there hasn't been a release of the big blockbusters. Those big companies and international organisations kept their major releases back until they had audiences to be able to go and obviously pay towards the cost of the productions. And also people are somewhat nervous of going into the confined space of a theatre with COVID ever present. So they particularly have difficult conditions to meet. So again, I'm quite happy about helping out an organisation to lease a building from us and hopefully restore them back to fuller profitability and giving us a full rental over the next 12 months. So with that, I'm going to agree to the recommendation to their rental concession to those resolutions that are shown on the screen. And the third one of these is item 210, which again is a slightly different one, and that is looking at the lease to Howard Limited, which operates the Woi Woi Oval Cafe. Now, the Woi Woi Oval Cafe was built when it was constructed by council for cafe purposes. When it was first looked at, there was no takers for that cafe on a commercial basis. Howard came along and they offered to take up a lease on it, but unfortunately for them, the time they commenced it put them outside the rules that were set by the federal and state governments for rental relief. Now, they're in a situation now where they're basically going to go through unless we can do something about it. Now, quite clearly, the community and users of sports fields and so on value the use of that cafe. So what we're proposing is that we cancel their current lease, write off the debts associated with it, and enter into a short-term lease with them that will reflect their current use of the premises and so on. Now, these tenants, our staff say, are very good tenants. They've invested, they've done their very level best to attract foot traffic and so on in very difficult times. So it's not a question of them having sat on their backsides and tried to make things, hope things would come right. They've actually been highly proactive and done a range of things to try and increase their business. So again, for different reasons, I'm very comfortable in giving them a hand up, and therefore I'm going to agree to the recommendations that are shown on the screen. Now, item 211 is the Wamberal Beach Terminal Protection and Sand Nourishment Studies and Outcomes. And I know that Dr. Howe has a presentation to, I guess, take you through what exactly is going to happen here and how we've come to the conclusion we have.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report presents draft engineering guidelines for a seawall and beach nourishment at Wamberal. Wamberal is one of 4 coastal erosion hotspots on the Central Coast. Since significant erosion occurred in the 1970s, and you can see an image there, I think it's from 1974, there's been extensive research undertaken to determine the most feasible solutions to addressing these coastal hazards. At Wamberal, this work has culminated in the Gosford Beaches Coastal Zone Management Plan, which determined that a seawall coupled with sand nourishment was the preferred solution, and the slide describes the actions that are included in that certified plan. Since 2020, progress to implement the adopted Gosford Beaches Coastal Zone Management Plan has culminated in a detailed cost-benefit analysis of 5 seawall options. Community consultation has been undertaken throughout the 6 stages of that work, particularly in late 2020, mid-2021 and earlier this year. The draft engineering guidelines that we seek further community input on support a narrow seawall located as far landward as possible to maximise the beach width and reduce the need for ongoing sand nourishment. The works are proposed to be located on private land wherever possible, with construction, ownership and maintenance the responsibility of the landowners on which the wall is located. It's intended that the guideline will assist in the preparation and evaluation of development applications for this work. The guidelines identify the preferred concept design, which is to be constructed in not more than 3 stages. And that's important because an end-to-end embayment solution is critical for the success of the works at this location. The guidelines also identify how contamination on the site is to be managed, how beach access and safety will be protected, expectations around landscaping and aesthetics, and ongoing maintenance and safety measures. In developing these guidelines, we've lent on the experiences of others tackling this wicked problem, and I'd particularly like to acknowledge the support of the team at Northern Beaches Council, who have and continue to navigate through the complexities of coastal protection at Collaroy, and have shown what can be done. And the slides illustrate the situation that occurred at Collaroy with significant damage to infrastructure, private property, and to the beach in terms of access for the public, and what has been created on the site today through goodwill and coordination of both public and private interests in the coastal zone. And in terms of the next steps, the proposed approach from here would be for Council to reconfirm its adopted approach to coastal protection, to seek additional input on the draft guidelines prior to further consideration by Council, and to continue to work with the New South Wales Government, particularly through the Wamberal Seawall Task Force, to implement a sustainable long-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Now, in Canberra, there was a couple of presentations which I just want to relay a synopsis to you. and I think it's relevant for this particular paper. The first one was a company by the name of JLT, which are in fact the largest insurers for local government across Australia. Every year they seek from all councils what their top risks are. When they consolidated all that, for the year 2020, the number one risk was financial sustainability. The second biggest risk was assets and infrastructure, and the third was disasters and catastrophes from weather events, and fourth was cyber. Last year, the list was financial sustainability number one, cyber jumped up, and you may recall there was a number of hacks of public entities around that time. Third was again back to the assets and infrastructure, and fourth was disaster and catastrophes. Now what that says was what all councils are facing is their number one risk is financial, the assets being damaged, and the cost of disasters and catastrophic events from an insurance point of view. There was a second group that spoke, which was Access Economics, which was an offshoot of Deloitte's. And they talked about the expected increase from 2023 onwards of the number of events and the impact and the shortening of the recovery period. In other words, the time taken to actually fix up events. For example, the time it's taking us to fix up from the weather events now, for example, potholes. It takes us time to do that. So what they're saying is that time interval is getting shorter, and from really 23, 24 onwards, they're starting to see that where we're going to get another event before we've caught up with the previous one. And they're strongly recommending that the money, and it is costing, from their modelling, $38 billion this year for disaster recovery. 38 billion. Now, of that 38 billion, 97% of it is spent after the event, and only 3% in prevention or mitigation. They forecast by the year 2060, that number will have gone to 82 billion. Now, I think when you see something like Coleroy, we're facing a situation where since 1974, there's been, sorry, not Coleroy, Wamberal. Sorry, I refer to Coleroy because I was the CEO at Warringah when a lot of this started, so I'm very familiar with the team there and the issues there. And I will also have to say thank you to the team at Northern Beaches because they've shared their information with us, and we will continue to share information with them as we're all learning as we move forward in terms of trying to mitigate and spend money up front and increase that 3% so we're not spending vast sums of money for multiple years following trying to do cleanups. So there's a couple of things that we've learned. One of them you'll see in the specifications that we are putting in terms of the DA process an emphasis on landscaping or the visual appearance of what the wall looks like. That was something that was not necessarily implemented at the beginning at Coleroy, but that's some advice we've taken on board, and Dr. Howe has made sure that's being incorporated in the DA requirements that we are now putting out for the specifications. So it is timely that we actually take that opportunity to start spending money that needs to be spent to prevent countless dollars that will be spent down the track in trying to recover from these situations. Now, all councils that have coasts are suffering these issues to a greater or lesser extent. And if we believe climate change is advancing at the pace that it is, then they're all going to have problems which financially they will have no hope of being able to manage. As Mr. Farmer pointed out to me, we would have to double the rates to buy back those properties if retreat was the option. But I would remind the community, even if we did that, there is a road behind that. At some point you have to start protecting. So it's better to do it now and get on with it, which is what was strongly being suggested at the National Congress, and certainly councils like the Northern Beaches and ourselves, and right up north too, Byron and so on, are having to lead the way in the way we go forward. So with that, I'm very happy to support the paper that's proposed and confirm our position for a coastal protection seawall with sand nourishment. It is the least offensive. It is the most supported by the community of the realistic options, and it will have the least impact on the beach and the most protection for the houses that are there. And it is going to be built as much as possible on private land, not on community land, and the responsibility will be for the owners to maintain and look after it. So that keeps our costs down. Otherwise, the ratepayers just have to cough up to all the remediation things if we leave these things untouched. So I'm very happy to move this paper and have it out there for viewing, so while people can have a look at those specifications. So with that, I agree to move and pass those resolutions as shown on the screen. We'll now move to item 212, and that's to a request for a planning proposal at 60 Wyong Road, Tuggerah, which is alongside the Westfield there. So, Ms. Howe, again, can you speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We just have a couple of slides for this planning proposal. Council has received a request to rezone land at 60 Wyong Road, Tuggerah, known as the Tuggerah Gateway site. The proposal aims to create a new community of around 2,000 dwellings adjacent, as you mentioned, to the Tuggerah Westfield, which would be described in a site-specific development control plan, roughly aligned to the concept plan before you on the slides. It seeks to change the zoning from RU6 to R1 general residential, create additional open space and retain existing business and conservation zones. The proponent, Centre Group, is proposing to enter into a voluntary planning agreement. Go to the next slide, please. With council, which is valued at 11.6 million to fund public assets associated with that development. And in terms of the process, on the next slide, we're currently near the beginning of the rezoning process. A preliminary assessment has been undertaken and we have received independent advice from the Central Coast Local Planning Panel. That was only received later this afternoon, and so it has now been published as attachment 3 to the business paper. Should council resolve to support the recommendation, a planning proposal will be finalised and submitted to the Department of Planning and Environment for a gateway determination, which will commence the public exhibition process should the department support the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. Actually, normally we put that slide into the paper, don't we?
Perhaps we do.
Yeah, perhaps we do. Is it possible just to actually incorporate it up on the website so that people can see that positioning in some way? I think that's helpful because that slide tells you that's right at the beginning of a process and there's plenty more opportunity for the community to actually have a say about the way it goes forward. I'm certainly supportive of it going forward because I think, you know, the ability to get some more affordable housing in there and a greater variety, if you like, of mixed housing is certainly a great idea and, you know, sorely needed in this community. So I'm very happy to support it. The operators down that part of the world are good and it fits right in with public transport, the Tuggerah Station and the other areas, other facilities and amenities that are close by. And it will bring through the VPA some new amenities in terms of recreation space, etc. So with that, I'm happy to allow it to go to the next stage and approve it as per the recommendations that are shown on the screen. Now, Dr. Howe, I come to 2.13, and again, it's one of your draft proposals, which is the open space action plan for dogs. This is going out for consultation.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We do have a short presentation on this one too. As you mentioned, we do have a draft Dogs in Space action plan on which we're seeking community feedback. It provides a 10-year framework for action that relates to dog owners, but also those who don't want to interact with dogs in public spaces. It seeks to identify how we can protect the natural environment and how we can manage the interaction with recreation and sporting users of public space as well as dog owners. The action plan seeks to address public amenity as well as risk. And there are some significant additions in terms of off-leash areas. So there's a further 13 identified in the draft plan. It also recommends decommissioning 6 or relocating 6 open off-leash areas. They are at Allura Reserve, Davistown, which is a nesting site for the bushstone curlew, and Terrigal Haven, which is a high-use tourist location with a history of complaints about conflicts with dogs. Lee's Reserve, which is heavily vegetated and doesn't appear to be used for dog walking, as well as McCoy, a drainage easement, which is not a recognised off-leash area, and Carryong Reserve is scheduled for construction of a play space and skate facility, and we wouldn't be able to squeeze in an off-leash area with that new development. And lastly, Fagan Reserve is proposed to be relocated to Carawa Reserve at Point Clare. There's about 10 amendments to the boundaries of off-leash areas that is also proposed as part of this draft plan. So in terms of the next steps from here would be to seek a resolution for exhibition. We've provided quite a long period of exhibition for this because we know lots of people have an opinion about dogs, both for and against. It will come back to Council for your consideration following that community input. And if it was to be adopted, it will supersede the Dogs in Open Space policy from 2002 and the Dogs in Open Space strategy from 2012. And if people are interested in providing input, they can go along to our Have Your Say webpage. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. Yes, it always amazes me how many people are interested in dogs. I don't think I've been at any council yet where it hasn't been a major topic of interest for the community, so I would expect there will be a lot of community interest in this draft policy. I guess it's true to say that we have in fact actually increased the amount of a number of areas. So whilst we are potentially reducing a couple, or in fact maybe proposing to close a couple, and certainly I have to say the Haven is one area where I guess I was surprised to see dogs were allowed as a newbie here, because it's a very highly active precinct for people and of all ages. And I think not everybody's comfortable with having dogs running around off leash in those sort of high traffic areas. So that's one that is proposed, but we'll see what the community has to say when it goes out, as it will be from tomorrow. It'll be presumably on the website and out from there. So please, everybody, have your say. And I'm pleased to see that it's going out for a few extra days for consultation, because I'll be very surprised if we don't get a lot of comments on this particular one. And it is important. Dogs are, as they say, man's, or I guess you suppose in today's world you've got to say person's best friend, but nonetheless they are, a very, very great companion for a lot of people. And I think it is very important that dogs do have the ability to roam around and have a bit of fun themselves, but we just make sure that we're balancing that with the needs of those who don't have dogs and don't want to be pestered by dogs running up to them and potentially frightening young children, etc. So we've got to find a balance, and hopefully this will do that. And also it's about the policy trying to make sure that people know all the good things that they should do for their pet and their animal, and perhaps how not to encourage them to poor behaviour, which only leads to major issues if dogs do develop poor behaviour, as a number of our rangers would attest to. So with that, I'm going to agree to this going out for exhibition and endorse those recommendations that are shown on the screen. We now move to item 2.14, which is the Disaster Resilient Grant Funding Utilisation Program. Dr. Howe again.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report seeks endorsement of a proposal to spend $1 million that Council has received in local government recovery grant funding on measures to improve disaster resilience and maximise Council's ability to attract additional grant funding, particularly through the disaster recovery funding arrangements, to use those funds to address the impacts of disasters on the local community. The program includes restoration works at Canton Beach and the entrance, a flood study of Porters Creek, development of a disaster claims system for damaged council assets to help us maximise that DRFA funding opportunity, emergency preparedness investigations at Bar Point and Spencer, and development of a community-wide flood and bushfire dashboard. The program is proposed to be delivered by 2 additional temporary staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this is a good example of where we're looking to get into increasing that 3% into how can we start to prevent things happening. And I think it's good to see that we're getting some people on to actually start to be able to plan and utilise some of that funding that is available. And remember that there is this extra $200 million that the federal government announced last week down at the conference for emergency works and so on. So there's going to be these grants floating around, and it's very important given our community's, if you like, susceptibility to flood and coastal damage, particularly that we do look to see if we can't get in front of some of that damage and actually get some mitigation things in place up front. So I'm delighted to see that we're taking on some extra people to actually help plan for some of that and to hopefully get some more money out of the 2 tiers of government above us so that we can actually do something about increasing the amount of money that is spent on the mitigation or prevention compared to the recovery period afterwards. So with that, I will agree to endorse that grant funding program and endorse the appointment of a couple of staff to go in there. Thank you. Item 2.14, which is a proposed foreshore Crown Reserve adjustment at San Remo. That's just a pretty simple thing where there's a requirement to basically ensure that we can try and improve the waterway there, get rid of some of the smell that's there. There is some solution. We need to make sure that we in fact can write to the Crown's land to get an adjustment made. So this paper is just recommending that it is for me to agree that we write to Crown's land to be able to get that process underway. Quite happy to do that because it's obviously a good reason behind it. So with that, I'm just going to agree to that recommendation as shown on the screen. Item 2.16. Mr. Shearer, now your opportunity here. This is considerations of submissions and adoption of the draft tennis facility. So Mr. Shearer is Acting Director, Community and Recreation Services because the incumbent, Melanie Smith, is smitten down with some bug, which means she actually can't even appear on the screen. So she's really in a very bad way at the moment. Hopefully she will recover soon, but in the meanwhile, we have an able lieutenant, and Mr. Shearer, who will take you through this paper.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. So the Central Coast Tennis Action Plan provides strategic direction for development and sustainable management of tennis facilities across the Central Coast. There are currently 126 public tennis courts located in 34 centres across the local government area. 30 of these facilities are owned by council, with the balance remaining either private or schools or registered clubs. There are 16 clubs affiliated with Tennis New South Wales operating on council-owned facilities with more than 3,000 members. On top of that, council has a number of small facilities open to the public, free for use. The action plan has multiple objectives, including increasing community awareness and participation in tennis, identify and respond to key drivers, challenges and opportunities for tennis on the Central Coast, improve facility management and governance frameworks, development, implement and monitor performance-based occupancy agreements, implement and identify facility hierarchies and associated asset management regimes, and engage and consult with key partners in delivering the action plan, being Tennis New South Wales, Tennis Australia. The action plan was required to be placed on public exhibition for 28 days, which has been completed. We got 7 submissions of varying types, and a number of changes were made based on those submissions. In developing the action plan, Council and Tennis New South Wales staff met with a number of tennis facility managers over a period of time, collected information which led to the plan that's now up for adoption. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. So I note from the paper that we're actually expensing about the same sort of monies as we have been in previous years for the operational side. And obviously it's an updated plan now. And we've talked extensively to the tennis clubs. I'm surprised to hear there's that many. It's a lot, isn't it? What, 126? 126 courses, quite a lot of tennis courts, isn't it? Anyway, that's good to see. So with that, I'm going to support the recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those a decision of council. Item 2.17 is requesting that we provide 45,000 of financial partnership support to the Central Coast Academy of Sport. Coming from a sporting background, I have to say I'm strongly keen on providing help for organisations such as this. Just to give you some idea, since its inception in 2004, the Central Coast Academy of Sport has supported the development of over 4,000 athletes, and it's developed talent that has represented the region at 5 Olympic Games and produced 39 Australian representative athletes. Now, that's only at the elite level. And if you think of the people that are supported by the coaches and everything else that go through the programs there, it applies right across our patch. So it's a very, very worthwhile grouping. We unfortunately had to cut their sponsorship program, which is different to the financial partnership program, but hopefully we can keep them going with the financial partnership program, and hopefully we can look to, in future years, if we can continue to do well with our budgeting, we may be able to get back into the sponsorship league down the track, but we'll have to wait till we see how we perform. But with that, I'm keen to progress that and make sure that 45,000 gets across to that very worthwhile group. So with that, I'm going to move and pass those resolutions as shown on the screen. The Community Supports Grants Program, item 2.18. I've got to say I am somewhat disappointed that we have spent a grand total of 160, I suppose you could call it $167 million out of a total of 300 million that's available, and I can't see us spending the balance over the next month. So it is disappointing that we've not been able to get that money spent when we've got it there, because clearly supporting some of those community groups is very beneficial, A, to them, B, it keeps members of the community sort of integrated and having something to do. But I do understand the difficulty, as staff have pointed out, which is actually communicating to some of these groups, and also some of these groups having the ability to actually complete the documentation required to receive funding. So in speaking to the staff, they have agreed to see if they can't put more effort into the communications or the comms area, promotion if you like, and to offer a bit more support, as they have been doing, in terms of helping some of the organisations put grant applications together. Because it's a shame when we've got the money and we can afford it, that we're not actually getting it out to people who could benefit from it. But nonetheless, obviously very happy to put the grants through that are recommended here, which I think is a total of a further 13,000. So with that, I'm going to agree to the recommendations that are shown on the screen. Item 2.19 is the minutes of the Mangrove Mountain and Spencer Advisory Committee meeting held at the 11th of April 2022. Now, I know there's quite a lot of interest about what's been going on, particularly at Terra Verde. So I'm actually going to ask our Chief Legal Counsel and Head of Governance and Civic Services, Mr. Hock, to just actually give you a little bit of an update as far as he can, because clearly there's a bit of legal privilege involved at the moment, but we'll get the community as aware as much as he can, similar to what the residents had at the briefing previously that the minutes have taken off. Mr. Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. On the 20th of June, Justice Pepper in the Land and Environment Court heard the parties in relation to costs in the substantive proceedings, the decision on which was reserved. We await judgment in due course. In parallel, the Verde Terre parties have appealed the decision delivered by Justice Pepper on the 25th of March this year. That appeal is being defended by counsel and is listed for hearing on the 1st of September. There's a directions hearing tomorrow morning to ensure that the parties remain on track in relation to the preparation of the various court books for that appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. I guess in a sense the matter's still before the courts, isn't it? So, well, we're thinking about it, for want of a better word. Okay, with that, obviously I'll agree to note the minutes of that advisory group meeting as shown on the screen. Now, item 2.20 is a change in the organisational structure, which does have to come to council to be approved, just that change and the change in title. Now, this has come about because the previous CFO, Natalia Cowley, has in fact got a promotion, and she's going to start next week, next Monday, as the Chief Executive Officer for Coffs Harbour Council. So that's a great achievement by her, and while she's not here, I would certainly like to place on the record great appreciation, certainly I have, and I know other members in the council, and I would hope the community have, for her efforts in how she contributed to helping turn the council around. She's been instrumental in terms of our discussions with banking industry, our discussions with the state government, our discussions with IPART. She's been instrumental and resolute in not giving ground at all. And I guess the proof of all that hard work is the fact that we were successful with IPART, and we now have a projected surplus for the end of this current financial year of some 40 million plus, compared to the previous years of 90 million and 70 million losses respectively. So I just want to put on record, the public record, my thanks for Natalia for her efforts during her time here, and I wish her well in her new venture up north. I'm sure it won't be the last we hear of her. Turning to what we need to do because of that vacancy, and I strongly support what the CEO is recommending to me, the area that Ms Cowley had as the Director of Corporate Affairs and CFO was very, very large. It was a very large thing, and it had, I think, 9 direct reports. And it was a little bit out of balance compared to the other directorates. So Mr Farmer has suggested, and I strongly support it, a revised structure which reduces the number of direct reports to the newly titled Director of Corporate Services to 6 compared to 9, and redistributes the others out to Ms Howe and to Ms Smith, who are the other 2 respective directors. The CEO is projecting that he will retain, for the short-term position, the Group Financial Controller and Senior Financial Project Controller reporting directly to himself. So I support all those changes. I think they make absolutely good sense, and it gives us a slightly more balanced organisation and does not increase our cost structure at all, and does not increase the number of managers at the level 2 or 3 again at all. The one thing I just did seek some assurances from the CEO on, and it is implied that the corporate services, Director of Corporate Services will be the CFO. I'm very, very strong of the mind that the CFO must be a member of the executive and must be in a position to be able to directly advise council on things that are going on in the financial area. So with that assurance, I'm very happy to pass that on, and I look forward to the the new structure in place and the directors picking up their new roles, which are a bit more inclusive. So with that, we'll move and pass those recommendations that are shown on the screen. And we'll move to item 2.21, which is the last item on the agenda. And that is minutes of the advisory group and committee meetings held in April, May and June 2022. Now, just to note that these are unconfirmed minutes and they don't include any recommendations for council, so they are reported for information only. And so links to these unconfirmed minutes are seen for catchments to the Coast Advisory Committee meeting, the Coastal Open Space System Cost Committee meeting, Status of Women Advisory Group meeting, and Social Inclusion Advisory Group meeting, and Protection of the Environment Trust Management Committee meeting. So those minutes are on the website and they can be seen there. So with that, I will note those minutes that were held in May and June 2022, and I will now recommend that we close the meeting with that and close the meeting at 7:53 p.m. Thank you for your attendance, everybody.